The beginning of Lent, the 40 days, the sad springtime of the church, the ashes, the desert, the yearning for freedom, the bracing focus on truth. On Ash Wednesday this week, I went straight from the lunchtime Eucharist here to the Houses of Parliament, about a 20-minute walk from here for a meeting with the MP for Westminster. I'd been ashed at the service, which is to say that I had the sign of cross marked in ash on my forehead. I was a little late arriving, so after the airport-style security, I was hurrying through the large Westminster Hall. I realised halfway down the hall that someone was running up behind me. A security guard was catching me up, and she spoke from behind and asked me to turn around and face her. I was a bit nervous, as it might be described, a mild scene was beginning to develop. "What is that?" she said, pointing to my head. "It's the cross," I said. "Why?" she said. "It's Ash Wednesday, the beginning of Lent." And because I was flustered, I added, "It's really to say that I'm sorry and I want to start again." "Okay," she said. "Sorry," I said again. "It's good," she said. When I got to the meeting, our neighbour, a priest from the Jesuit church, also had an ash cross on his head. The cross in ash had made its way into the place where taxes are raised and priorities determined, where the legislative process determines how society works, what gets done, who gets listened to, and who gets ignored. There is so much to say about the first reading today from Genesis, the second of those Genesis creation stories. The misleading translation of Adham as male, whereas in fact it's much more of an androgynous term meaning human in the verses immediately preceding the reading we had today, not defined by gender. The catastrophe of centuries of preaching that crush the female figure of Eve, that has exacted such terrible violence against women and girls, endorsed and reinforced from pulpits like this one, from churches like this over generations. For years, young girls to old women have been told that they are somehow responsible for all the wrong in the world and that they are to remain silent. It's never wrong to counter this teaching, even in today's society, because the truth is, for the 2 billion Christians in the world today, nearly all of them will never hear a woman preach a sermon, let alone celebrate the Eucharist. Underground internet cultures, such as that of the incels, who explicitly hate women for being women, have led to violence against women and girls being declared recently by that same parliament I was in on Wednesday as now on a par in terms of priorities with terrorism. For myself, having been ordained in the mid-90s, when the Church of England retched and squirmed as it ordained women as priests, I find myself this morning re-enraged by the violence meted out to women and girls in the name of this creation story, in a world that falls very short of Eden. Drawing on the writing of Phyllis Tribble back in 1973, we need as Christians no longer to accept the traditional interpretation of this story. Adam is all humanity. In this origin story, the narrative, as Phyllis Tribble says, tells us who we are, which is creatures of equality and mutuality. It also tells us who we have become, creatures of oppression, and so it opens possibilities for change, for a return to our true freedom under God. And the second reading today, the Gospel, such a rich and creative meditation on the motivations that guide your and my actions every day. I'm not quite so interested in what we believe about the figure that the New Testament calls the devil, although artistic representations are vivid and confronting, like the one on this week's St. James's newsletter. I'm only bothered if I hear it dismissed as pre-modern nonsense. Because what the gospel is communicating is profound and true. What the gospel calls diabolos in Greek or Satan in Hebrew carries the meaning of adversary, opponent, contrary voice, carries the meaning of one who both deceives and separates. Deceives and separates. Who here does not recognize those forces alive and at work in the world? The spiritual forces in the world that seek to deceive and separate, sow seeds of division and divide in order to control. How do we face up to this and deal with it in today's world as communities of Christians? By building communities that insist on the opposite. Not deception and separation, but communities of truth and connection. And this means love. In the earliest Hebrew writings, the figure of Satan is not a sort of four-square block of evil, but in fact a rather attractive, ambiguous, seductive voice. Christianity, then, is not so much a belief system as a life and death system. Learning not a list of impossible things to believe, but a language of living that teaches us to speak of love and to live lives immersed in love, motivated by love, tenaciously clinging to love. The intellectual to and fro about the shape and form of religion doesn't always get to the heart of what it means to be human in the world. And that's our core purpose in gathering, to learn from each other, from Christ, from God, to learn how to love, to learn how to give ourselves away, how to die, how to pray. In learning how to love, human beings know more and more deeply our interdependence then with all that lives and has lived. This means we know more and more deeply our connection, and this connection is enough to change the world. Love is strength, decision, political and corporate. One of the sins, if we're talking about sin in Lent, one of the sins of this present age is that the church has followed society too closely in that we've allowed love to be privatized and only expressed as individual, even sexualized love. Love in the gospel is a statement of intent, a course of action. It's dynamic and active in the world, and there's a radical connection and acceptance at the heart of it that emanates from this altar. Broken bodies, shed blood, sacrifice made for the sake of this love that will not be denied or destroyed. At that meeting in Parliament, I was with a group of young people from the City of Westminster College studying health and social care. They wanted to raise issues as they face as young people regarding transport subsidies for students, the quality of air in London, and particularly a campaign aimed at 18-year-old Black and minority ethnic students focused on voter registration before the next general election in 2024. I was there to make a contribution concerning the government's manifesto pledge to end rough sleeping by 2024, but heard from our MP that this is no longer a priority, given the other priorities of levelling up, dealing with the aftermath of Brexit and the implications to energy prices of the war in Ukraine. It occurred to me as I sat there in that same committee room that some of us had been in just a few weeks earlier, in a meeting calling for the Church of England to endorse equal marriage, that there was no better place to be on Ash Wednesday. I was marked with the cross, with the words, "Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return," ringing in my ears. Turn away from sin, we're invited to say. Be faithful to Christ. And the reality of the horse trading of priorities for national and local political leaders was sharp. It occurred as I spoke about the work of this church as part of a team that included our neighbours at Farm Street Jesuit Church and Bloomsbury Baptist Church, that this is where the church should be, especially at a time when assisting people who've become homeless has slipped down the political priorities. 3 main areas in which this church community, in which you are active, is people going through homelessness, people enduring the hostile environment of the asylum system, and the climate emergency. What I realized again on Ash Wednesday is that the political priorities are none of these. That story in Genesis has cast Eve as responsible for all the sin of the world. But it's occurred to me this week, as part of all those experiences, that far from avoiding being Eve, I hope that we could even be a church full of Eves, whatever your gender identity, however you describe yourself. Because Eve's vocation is not that traditional interpretation, the one who alone has spoiled paradise, the one who has ruined the man or polluted and stained creation. No, I invite us all to be more Eve. Eve's vocation is provocation, questioning, trusting her instinct not to hide or give glib answers, but to help one another live with the unknowing, with the mystery of living and dying, to help one another live with those profound questions. Yes, of course, in the collective exchanges of that Genesis story, of course Eve plays her part, motivated with Adam by the impulse to deceive and separate in order to maintain power. Humanity as a whole in this story moves, as Phyllis Tribble says, from the Eden of equality and freedom to the recognizable situation of inequity that is human society today. Partly, perhaps mostly, because we have forgotten our connection with the rest of the created order. There are parts of the human condition, of you and me, that want to perpetuate that inequality because it serves us. That's why the most difficult parts of the Bible are the most important. The Bible's powerfully troublesome qualities are some of its greatest strengths. But in the hands of simplistic interpreters, it can be made, as many texts can, of course, to serve other ends, other purposes than the purposes of God, which are to liberate, save, free, and heal. This morning, we'll have listened to that story of creation. This afternoon, I hope that many will return to be part of it. The L'Arche community of London are here today at 3:00 to tell us the story of creation. Please come and be part of it. You need an umbrella, a flower, and some sunglasses. All of those will be provided if you haven't brought them with you. The L'Arche community, for those of you perhaps unfamiliar, is a community where people with learning disabilities and assistance, and I lived in a L'Arche community for some time, all live together. I have to say that I owe this experience a lot. Living in L'Arche revolutionized my own understanding of what it is to be human, revolutionized my ingrained and learned categories of success and failure, power and love, revolutionized my understanding of myself, the difference between impairment and disability, talent and mistakes, revolutionized my understanding of how I was made and who I was made for, and exposed in its community and convicted a competitive and violent society, and exposed and convicted me as part of that society. If you come at 3 today, I guarantee your heart will fill up. You will know more about what it is to be human in the world. You will acquire a different kind of knowledge, a felt knowledge that will help reorder our priorities and give us a refreshed vision of life in the world. The poet Kay Tempest, closely associated with this church as president of the Blake Society founded here, has written recently that numbness is a logical response to the onslaught of the age. They call for a renewed focus on creativity in order for deeper connection between us, and call for a new concentration on love as a way through these wounded times. Of course, the church as a whole, including this church, has a long way to go in addressing this numbness, this inequity, the ashes of mourning, where too many lives are restricted or destroyed. From this morning's Lent study of Lola Olufemi's writing comes this, the most evocative sign of the ash of Lent. Lola writes this: I aim, through experiments in feeling, to reveal and destroy what it is that keeps us here, what it is that stops us from deciding to leave, even as the cinders mix with our hair, the smoke corrupts our lungs, the flames engulf the people we love. The gospel confronts us with the profound truth today that love, even when expressed in ashes, even when faced with the lie that we are fundamentally separate from one another or creation, even in the face of all this onslaught, inequity, and the cruelty of which we're all capable, in the gospel, in this political space, such as a church, we bear witness to Christ, whose life of love gives us a model of living. Love that provokes, that insists on connection and creativity, that faces down the deception that tells us we exist alone and gives us a way through, and insists, as I tried to in my conversation with the security guard, that it's never too late to begin again. Amen.